Welcome to Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell. This is the place where we dive into the world of talent acquisition, explore the challenges of today's workplace, and discover what it takes to build a thriving and successful organization.
Today, we dive deep into the world of culture, a topic that impacts everything, both inside and outside the office. Joining us is Dr. Marcus Collins, a leading expert on cultural contagion and meaning making. He's the best-selling author of For the Culture, which just released an updated version, and a clinical marketing professor at the University of Michigan. Dr. Collins, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, John. I'm super excited to be here.
I'm glad to have you as well. So I'm going to dive right in. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about culture today, which I know is kind of a wonderful topic for you. But I'd like to start by, can we connect the dots between the greater culture with culture at work? And how does cultural understanding really impact the way someone leads at work?
That's a fantastic frame to start. I mean, essentially, culture is culture regardless of the context. So the idea of what we call culture, what some would say the program for everyday living, sort of how we do things around here is how we colloquially refer to it. The same culture that exists in the broader societal context are the same cultural mechanisms that are at play in our organizations, and the same cultural mechanisms that are at play when we are in the shopping mall or the grocery store buying things. They're these invisible forces that guide our behavior. They're the most influential external forces of human behavior, full stop. And the better we understand them, the more likely we are to navigate these cultural waters with more agency than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, and when you talk about navigating a culture, it's not like we walk into an office and there's road signs that say, hey, this is our happy place, this is our be honest place, or whatever it may be. How do we pick up on those cues? Is it just social cues, or are there other things that discrete indicators that actually act as road signs?
I think that's what makes culture such an enigma, because we can't see it, but we can certainly feel it. We can't touch it. It's almost like kind of grabbing vapor, but we certainly know its presence. We experience culture based on the social interactions of people. So maybe we should start by just defining culture.
Yeah, let's do
that. What I found is that, as a marketer by trade, when I say things like, let's get our ideas out in the culture, everyone down here go, yes, 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 yes. And, when I'm talking to CEOs, I go, our ideas need to be informed by culture. They go, yes, 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 right? Definitely. We need to be informed by culture. Even HR folks say, we have a foosball table in the kitchen. We have a great culture here.
We have great culture, yeah.
Everyone talks about culture. We have Summer Fridays. Great culture here. Culture, 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 culture. But if you ask 5 people to define culture, you get 55 different answers, and that's a problem, right? It's a problem. And it's hard to define culture because it's so omnipresent. It's so ethereal. It's so esoteric and abstract. So I think about culture through a sociological lens. I look at it through the lens of one of the founding fathers of sociology, a gentleman by the name of Emil Durkheim. And he talks about culture as a system of conventions and expectations that demarcate who we are and govern what people like us do, right? It's a system, an operating system that carves out the place that we occupy in the phenomenal social world and identifies what's expected and acceptable for people like us, right? So it's anchored in our identity, and who we are informs how we see the world, our beliefs and ideologies. And because of how we see the world, we navigate the world accordingly. The artifacts we don, the behaviors that are normative, the language that we use. Then we express ourselves through shared work, what we call cultural production. And the alchemy of those systems, or systems of systems, make up our culture. And you can't sort of see culture at face value, but you can see culture being practiced in the artifacts, behaviors, language, and cultural production. So when you go into an office building, you go into a group of people who are part of an organization, they identify as such, you can get a sense of the culture based on what you can observe. But what informs the culture is what they collectively believe.
And then what they do.
That's right. And what they do is a byproduct of what they believe.
Yeah. I mean, as a CEO, you sit atop of an organization and you say, okay, we want this kind of culture. And I believe it starts there,
Yes.
but if it doesn't flow and the actions don't follow, that's not your culture. So, I mean, how many people have you heard say, well, hey, that culture just didn't really fit with me, so I decided to go somewhere else?
That's right. That's right. I mean, I wish it was as easy as saying, we want a culture of innovation and presto changeo, we
Hey,
started
there it
doing
is.
things. Like that would be amazing. But that's not how it works. It requires a ton of intentionality with regards to the conventions and expectations that you want to be an operating system for your organization. It's almost like you think about rearing children, like we want our children to be a certain way. So therefore, the world that we curate for them, the culture in our homes, have to be as such that they are fostering an environment where they're far more likely to be a certain way. And I used an example of children intentionally because when we think about culture, actually kind of comes from that, right? So the Latin word for culture means to cultivate, to harvest, right? To tend to.
Grow.
Exactly, to grow, which is why, we think about agriculture as a way of harvesting, tending to, so things grow with uniformity. My crops grow with uniformity. The same thing goes when it comes to culture in society, our people. We would raise kids, what Altucher referred to as interpolate kids, such that our children grow with some uniformity within our society of people like us. The same thing goes when we think about our organizations. We have a culture so that there is some predictability with regards to how we collectively work together and the production of our work, what we collectively make, be it service-based product or a product good. And as much as we want to say we have a culture of innovation, we have a culture of
Hard work.
collaboration, of all these other things, we want to have those things. You have to invest in it. You have to harness it. You have to harvest it. You have to tend to it. You have to cultivate it. It's more than just intentionality. There's be intentionality in how you go about doing it as well.
Very good. So in what ways can leaders then leverage their cultural insights to address? So I write about and talk about a lot about the workforce, right? And trying to solve workforce challenges in the electronics industry, where we've been facing a workforce challenge across the electronics industry for 30 years because it's constantly changing, the skill. So there's always a skills gap. How can leaders leverage cultural insights to try to address skills gaps?
Well, I think that there's a few things to think about. So skills gaps are typically an anemia of talent. And what we tend to do when there is a talent anemia, we try to hire talent that is a reflection of what we want. For instance, if if I work in automotives and I'm here in Detroit, work in an automotive company, I've hired people who have worked in automotives, right? If I'm
They've got that experience.
They got the experience. So we end up hiring people who have done the things that they've done before. And then we sort of wonder, why are we getting new results? Right? So
if you're using a cookie cutter, why am I not getting different shaped cookies?
Exactly. But you go, well, because there's certain talent needs to be there. Well, then it's our job to teach, which means if we want heterogeneity with regards to the talent pool that we get to pull from, then we have to have a disposition to teach where there is a skill anemia. Therefore, we hire people who are willing to be taught. We hire people who are curious. We hire people who are ambitious and want to close the gap, as opposed to hiring people who the gap has already been closed and actually don't have a disposition to want to learn. That sort of, that small little pivot, the small little change in framing leads you to not only different kind of talent, but different places to find them. And you think about, oh, well, if we are going to hire people who are curious, because we believe that curiosity is actually what closes the talent gap, because the talent gap should actually constantly be a buffering
Always
thing.
there.
Always there. Exactly, because we want to evolve, right? So there's always going to be a talent gap. So instead of trying to close the gap with the people we already have, let's find people who want to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting, especially, and I don't have this anywhere on my notes at all, but it just popped into my head. In the world that we're living in with AI, things that people that are looking to just maintain a certain set of skills are right to be replaced by something by like automation and AI because it's just kind of the same thing.
That's right.
What we really need is, you know, I couldn't agree more. You hire people often for what they can do, but you also want to make sure that they have that can do attitude or
That's right.
want to be more attitude. There are roles that, I know in our organization, there's people who've done the same job for a long period of time, and that's fine, but it's also a job at risk.
1000%. It was that the quote, I'm gonna paraphrase it, but essentially is the learners are the one that's going to be the learners are the ones who will be ready for the world of tomorrow, because those who feel they learned everything will be beautifully equipped for a world that will not exist tomorrow. So the idea is that we know that, I mean, it's just the beauty of culture. Culture is always changing, and therefore, because culture is always evolving, there are going to be new needs, new expectations, and new outcomes for consumers, for people, for humans, for society, which makes changes with institutions and companies as well. Therefore, we as companies have to always change, and we have to have people in our organizations who want to change, who are willing to change. And it's the balance between the old guard and the new guard. I think of it as sort of like having two arms over each other, two fists. They're occupying the same space at the same time. You got the future and you got the past, and they live together with this sort of tension
In the present, right?
in the present, right? So as a leader, your job is to curate the present and do it as such where you're fostering an environment where the cognitions and affects of the people, that is, the cognitions, affects, and kinetics of the people, their conventions and expectations, their culture is as such that both of those two factions of people can thrive.
So you've been doing research on this cultural contagion. How does that research apply to workforce challenges?
Oh, yeah, because cultural contagion is the spread of affects, behaviors, cognitions, and desires among people. And these things are happening at a human level. Therefore, they are context agnostic. I think about this in the business world. We go, well, marketing works in a B2C capacity, but not B2B. It's just different. I go, well, yeah, it's different contextually, but at the core, it's P2P. It's just people, right? And the things that I study, I look at them in a
Yeah, you don't see
contextual.
too many companies, sorry to interrupt, but you don't see too many companies that have a credit cards per se. You have individuals with credit cards that are
Yes,
buying stuff on behalf of the companies. You're still
exactly.
talking to people.
Exactly. And even if you are engaged with another company, the person in procurement is a person, right? You are talking to someone. And so the things I study are the underlying physics of humanity. And I look at them in different contexts, but the thing I'm trying to get to is what's supporting all these things? Like, what is the underlying physics of it? So this idea of culture and its influence on each other, we have on each other through a social contagion perspective. These things happen in the shopping mall, they happen in classrooms, they happen on the street, and they happen in our organizations. It's saying no one's ever got fired for hiring IBM. That
Yeah,
is
yeah,
social contagion.
yeah,
I do it because it's acceptable for people like me. It's
yeah.
acceptable for people like us. That's why we drive what we drive, wear what we wear, style our hair the way we do if you have hair, marry who we marry, work where we work, go to school where we go to school. All the things that we do are byproducts of what's acceptable for people like us. Those things will be mediated and negotiated and confirmed through our cultural exchanges, through our cultural connections that are byproducts of social contagion.
That's great. That's great. So you also talk about cultural meaning making. Can you explain how cultural meaning making influences employee engagement?
Oh yeah. Have you ever given a talk and said, "Man, I just crushed that"? Like I
Yeah. Oh,
delivered.
they were on the edge of their seats, man. They were there.
Right. And then someone complains like, "Well, I don't like the way he said X, Y, and Z. He made me feel like this." You're like, "Well, that's not what I meant. I didn't intend for that." Well, that's a meaning incongruence. And
Okay.
this for me was one of the most powerful things that I found after writing the book and then teaching the book and helping organizations apply the learnings from the book to their work is that the world is not objective, it's subjective. Things aren't the way they are the way that we are, right? And Einstein said, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. The world is subjective by their very nature. That's why for some, a cow is leather, for others it's a deity, for some it's dinner. Which one is it? It's all those things. For some,
everything.
A rug is decor, for others it's a souvenir, for some it's a place of worship. Which one is it? It's all those things. Therefore, when we are communicating, we are interacting with people, people are constantly translating through their cultural frames, through their cultural subscription. So even in our organizations, we could talk a certain way based on what's acceptable for people like us, but then also realize that those people are in a part of other cultures. So when you say a certain thing, you go, I'm just saying it the way we say it, but they may experience it based upon who they are and how they see the world. So our ability to talk in a way where there is meaning, congruence, and fluency requires me understanding who these people are, not just workers, not just cogs in the machine, but real life human beings.
Yeah, who are multidimensional.
That's right.
I mean, it's, the phrase I often hear is, perception is reality, and it's everybody's individual perception determines their reality.
Exactly. I think about it this way. My favorite analogy for this, it's like going to a basketball game. If you have courtside seats, you are watching a different game than someone with nosebleed seats.
That's right.
Even though we're objectively watching the same activity, the same events are happening, but we experience them differently. So what does that mean for us? As leaders, it means that if we want the best representation of reality, we have to sit in many, 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 many seats.
You talk about when, like they do this, say there's an accident and you have different observers talk about it. They all see different things.
That's right. That's right. That's right. I mean, any argument I have with my wife is always a result of this. Well, I like the way you said it. I didn't say it that way. Well, that's how I heard it.
That's what I heard. That's not what I meant.
You're right. You're like, well, I didn't say those words, but your face said something different. I mean, all these things we're constantly communicating, and people are translating it through their cultural lenses, through experiences that they've had, through the reality that they've shaped in their minds. That's meaning making. The idea then is that when we communicate, we have to communicate through an empathic point of view, in that I'm going to say a thing in a certain way that I know John is going to receive well, which requires me knowing John.
That's right.
And the same thing goes in our organizations. We have to communicate, we have to show up, we have to act, make decisions based on not how we see it, but how our people see it, which requires you knowing your people, not the org chart, not the name in the box with the dots, the dotted line.
Or the degrees that they won at, whatever institution they were, or, certification they received. Yeah.
That's right. But who they are and how they see the world. So that when you say cow, are they talking about dinner, leather, or a deity?
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about the book for just a minute here. I've been dying to get to it, and I'm going to just skip to that spot here. So in your book, For the Culture, what insights do you offer about reimagining workplace dynamics?
Well, I think I make the argument that we know culture is important when it comes to our organizations, but we don't understand culture enough to actually tend to it. For instance, we will go hire the best talent ever. We spend so much time, effort, and energy trying to find the best recruit, the smartest strategist, the best skilled person, right? We try to find the best seed, but we don't invest in the environment, the soil in which that seed is going to be planted. And we know one thing: bad soil is not good for good seeds.
He's not going to grow.
Don't present good fruit. So our approach to culture has always been about the individuals as opposed to the environment. Well, someone may say, no, Marcus, we invest in our environment. We have a foosball table. We have beautiful decor on the walls. Like, we have the best furniture. And I go, well, no, that's the structure. That's the edifice. What we care more about is the infrastructure. This is the sort of all the mechanisms that are happening that are invisible that you don't see until a problem happens. When a problem happens, just like, if a pipe bursts in your home, it has all your attention.
Suddenly you're aware of the plumbing.
Exactly. But typically we ignore, we take plumbing for granted. And the
Yeah.
same thing goes with culture, the interactions between people in our organizations. Or we go, well, we have good strategies, right? And we should design our organizational structure based on those strategies. We want to do this, so let's put people here, there, and do those things. Well, Peter Drucker, though he was misattributed to this quote, says that culture eats strategy for breakfast, because there's tons of strategies out there, but there are not tons of companies who have great culture. And why is this important? Because it doesn't matter how good the strategy is, if your people don't have the wherewithal, the capabilities to collectively come together and produce the work that is a reflection of that strategy, it's never going to work. So the book is making the argument that we need a better understanding of culture. We need a better Rosetta Stone to talk about culture so that we can identify the mechanisms of culture and actually do something about it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, in the book that I launched last year, Fire Your Hiring Habits,
Yeah.
I think fully 25% is just talking about culture, because it's all about how do you find and keep the best people. Well, you're not going to do either of those things unless you have a great culture that they want to be part of.
That's right.
And
That's right.
yeah, and so you have to. So yeah, great,
And
wonderful.
the thing is that it's so obvious, but I found the obvious is typically only obvious when someone points it out to you. I mean, it's right there in front of your face, right in front of our faces, and we know this intuitively. But when we're in a leadership position, it's hard for us to see this because there's so much going on. There's so many decisions need to be made. So we look at the things that are right in front of us, as opposed to the things that are making those things happen. Like, you got to invest in the soil.
Yeah, I mean, and so as a leader of a company as well, it's easier to form a strategy or a budget or whatever you're doing because it's discrete.
That's right.
Culture constantly changes. There's a lot of moving parts to it. And as we talked about earlier, it's not like there's roadmaps that, hey, putting a sign on where the cool place to work doesn't make you the cool place to work.
Wouldn't that be amazing? And you're right, like, our biology is actually working against us here. We have a tendency to overvalue the concrete, the things that we can see, right?
I can measure that, so I know exactly what that is.
We
Do you
have
have
a
a good
cognitive
culture? How do I
bias.
measure that? I'll ask a survey. Well, guess what? Today he's having a bad day, and tomorrow she's having a great day. So which do I believe?
That's what's right. So because we have a tendency to overvalue or pay attention to the concrete, we tend to undervalue and ignore the things that are more nebulous, things that are more abstract. But those things matter. They matter more than the tangible things. Now, they don't mean that there's sort of a bifurcation that you do one without the other. They work better together, a 1-2 punch. But without the culture, none of the other stuff will matter.
Yeah, that's great. So Marcus, can you share some examples maybe of companies that have successfully used cultural strategies to solve some of their workforce challenges?
Oh, yeah. So I've had the fortunate pleasure of working with McDonald's quite a bit throughout my career. But in this last instance, McDonald's was battling a lot of hate for a long time, like 15 years. Think 2004, all the way to 2019. McDonald's is the most hated company in the country. That was actually voted on in 2014.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't realize that.
Hated company in the country. They were the punching bag for everything wrong with the American diet, right? Everything wrong with the American diet, McDonald's was the scapegoat for it.
You're the blame, yeah.
Exactly. So the agency I was working for, Wyden Kennedy at the time, the agency, we meet McDonald's and, we say, yeah, people definitely hate you. That's true. But 68 million people show up at your door every single day. That's a lot of love. Won't you focus on the love? And McDonald's said, we never thought about that. We had spent so much time trying to fight the hate that we didn't think about the people who loved us. And the truth of the matter is probably actually more glaring, is that they didn't know those people who loved them. They knew their credit card information, but they didn't know them as human beings. So the team did an entire ethnographic undertaking to understand who they are. We found this thing we call fan truths, sort of special, shared, and social things of what it means to be a fan of McDonald's. And we used that information, that knowledge, that insight to activate fans. And for 4 years, McDonald's saw double-digit growth.
Wow.
Didn't change any of the products, only the cultural framing. Now, that alone McDonald's went from being the most hated company in 2014 to in 2023 become one of those beloved companies, right? The Wall Street Journal said they were cool. I don't know if they have the right to say that, but they did. Right? And the campaign that the agency did, that we did, became the most effective, was rewarded the most effective marketing campaign on the planet. Now, in doing that, I was like very proud. Like, look what we did. This was amazing. This was amazing. But what really got my attention, what really like blew my mind, with all the internal cultural shift that McDonald's had to make to do that work.
Oh,
They had
okay.
to stop seeing people as consumers and see them as fans, which is hard for a massive corporation.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Like, they are an operations company in many ways, right? And they see historically consumers as like machines who eat messages of crap cash, one would say.
Yeah, like you said, they knew their credit card numbers, but they didn't know the people.
That's right. So McDonald's had to start seeing people as fans and engage them like fans.
Yeah.
That is a massive shift. And that also meant, if we're going to engage them like fans, or how do fans engage? Well, they rework things. They take a brand's IP and sort of contort it and bend it and recontextualize it. For a brand like McDonald's, that was a big ask, because
Yeah.
brand safety, brand
Golden
guidelines,
arches, and we know what this is, right?
do not play with the golden arches. Do not play with our IP. But fans play with things. So McDonald's had to say, okay, we're going to let things go and let them play. And perhaps the biggest step for McDonald's is that they had been, for at least 14 years, operating from a place of fear. How do we ensure that we don't make more people upset? How do we sort of protect the little goodwill that we have, as opposed to taking big swings and trying to find new spaces? They had to learn to be creatively courageous. And those shifts from McDonald's, if they didn't make those shifts, it didn't matter how much we knew about fans. If they didn't make those shifts, none of that work was possible. And that, for me, is like, that's the magic. That's the magic. I'm spending my entire career thinking about the external culture. But that experience with McDonald's became a massive inflection point for me, because I started to realize that the external culture is not helpful if the internal culture, or dare I say, the internal customer, isn't being served. So that's the work I've been on since that epiphany, and realizing how powerful culture is, not just outside the walls of the company, but inside it as well.
Yeah, I hope the listeners, who are largely, business leaders that listen to this podcast, heard that. I mean, because it's what you're trying to affect externally for your business is largely a reflection of your internal culture.
That's
I
right.
think that's so important. So let's talk about some of the barriers to some of this cultural change. So if you have a culture that maybe you would like to have shifted or changed in some way, or maybe completely overhauled, what are some of the common cultural barriers to organizational progress, and how can they be overcome? Just, can you list a few and maybe some examples around how people have done that?
Sure. I say, well, the first is just not knowing. You say, you ask someone to describe.
Yeah, you don't know you have a bad culture.
That's right. You ask, especially leadership, because people typically aren't that honest. The organization.
It's really hard when the CEOs, how are things going? They're going great, sir.
Oh, great.
I'm sorry, man. No, everything's fine.
And then 3 months later, they resign. You go, I thought things were great.
Yeah, what's going on?
I wasn't even looking. And all of a sudden, just in my inbox, like, come on.
Magically.
I wasn't looking. I love it here, Tom. No. So first, it's just kind of ignorance. They just don't know. And even though leaders and organizations would do like, a climate report, or sort of just get a pulse on things, they typically are sort of sentiment focused, and they don't allow you to get an understanding of meaning. People are upset. Well, why are they upset? Well, you don't really know that. Well, let me go talk to people. The people don't be honest with you. So you find yourself in this quagmire where you never get to like reality. So that's the first, the not knowing. And the second part is that when we do know things are bad, we go, well, what can we do? And the first thing we think about is like, well, let's try to provide more perks. So what do companies do? We're going to have pizza on Fridays, or we're going to do breakfast in the morning. We try to perk ourselves out of a quote unquote bad culture. And the thing is that like those perks just become transactional. They don't get to actually the root of the issue. And the third, by and large, is that we try to policy our way out of it. We go, well, we're going to create these rules so that people show up on time or people do these things. We're going to create these rules. And the truth of the matter is that leaders make rules, but it's the people who make the culture. So how do we do this? Right? The idea then is that leaders are not there to make culture, to enforce culture. They are there to inspire it and model it. To say, here's what we want to be because of how we see the world, because of our shared ideology. This is what we want to be, and we're going to model it in our behavior. And the people who are there in the organization goes, I like that. I kind of like that.
I want to be part of that.
I want to be a part of that. And as more people collectively do it through what we call social contagion, it becomes what people like us do around here. The people who don't want that, the people who don't fit into that go, it's not the right place for me. I'm out of here.
Yeah. So one of the things that, I totally agree that leaders have to model it. We've taken it. So at IPC, where I lead the organization for the Electronics Trade Association, one of the other things that we do we have a monthly, what we call global update meeting, but we also try to highlight individuals who are living the cultural aspects that we like. So we're sitting there saying, hey, by the way, we value, let's say, integrity, right? And how people act in an integrous manner. And we want to make sure that's out there. So, hey, Julie over here did this one thing, and we just come up and tell us a little bit about what you did there and why that was the right thing. So it's not just the leaders modeling, but it's the leaders highlighting those who are also modeling.
That's right. Yeah, you give it up for Julie. Julie,
great job. This is what we want.
That's
this
right.
Is great.
It helps tangibilize these intangible things, right? It takes things that that are unsaid. I mean, by its very nature, like culture isn't said. It's understood. That's why we use memes as a way to communicate, right? Memes are vessels of cultural information, much like genes are vessels of biological information. And if someone has to explain the meme to you, you go, "Oh, that kind of sucked, man." It's like explaining the joke to someone. If you don't get the joke,
exactly. It doesn't translate well, and you have to explain it.
Exactly. I think the culture of an organization is like that as well. In fact, we won't explain the culture of an organization, at least on what is sort of brought down to us from policy, but we will communicate sort of what's expected. For instance, say you just joined a company and you ask someone, you say, "Hey, John, you've been here for like 4 years. I'm trying to figure this out. What should I do?" You've heard someone say this before. Well, you're supposed to do this, but this is how everybody else does it.
This is actually how we do it.
This is how we do it around here, right? So it's that sort of explicit communication first, so that and once you go, great, I know what to do. Like that person has modeled what the real culture is. So when leaders want to model it, not only to themselves, but other case studies, that are the people who are in the organization, it's a great way to do it. Makes it much more tangible.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, so many of my questions, I feel like, as we've discussed, feel obvious now. It's like, oh, well, obviously you need to engage with this. But in what ways does cultural competence contribute to better leadership in global organizations? So, culture shift around the world.
Yeah. So now we start to get into sort of metacognitive cultural spaces, because it's easier when we are all in the same nation, because there are some general cultural expectations.
You just keep saying, if we're all raised in the same house, we get that.
That's right.
Same neighborhood, we get that. Same city, we get that.
That's
same
right.
country, and it just keeps harder and harder.
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly right. Exactly right. And to your point, when you said this earlier about, that our perception is reality, that our perception, the way we see the world, it is terribly complex. It is so complicated and in many ways contradictory. Right? There's a scholar named Crenshaw that 1989, she brought this idea of intersectionality, that we are made up of many monikers, many identity monikers that we use to to self-identify, right? We're an
Of course.
alchemy of these many things. And because we are an alchemy of these many things, sometimes they bump up into each other. Sometimes they are at odds with each other. But we are able to sort of mitigate them and sort of find reconciliation within them, within ourselves, after years and years and years of living as such. But people don't know that. Goodness gracious, they don't even know how to deal with you. That's just us as an individual here in the United States. Now you take that intersectionality with the complexities of different cultural expectations at a national level, an ethnicity level, a religious level, a
Yeah.
social group level.
Age group, experience, every single aspect of, this
That's right.
tapestry that makes up a diverse world.
That's right. And the only way that we can engage in that is to do it from a place of empathy. Like, cultural competency really is just your ability to see the world through the lenses of people who make meaning differently than you. Being able to take off your lenses, take off the way you see the world, and adopt the perspective of someone else and go, oh, wow. For me, a rug was always just decor, but you see it as a place of worship. Huh. I didn't realize that.
I
I'll
hadn't
make
thought of that.
sure that I don't wipe my feet off on your rug because
Yeah.
this is a sacred place. Like, just that, like, that is empathy. And that level of humanity draws people in, and they feel far more psychologically safe to do work with you.
Yeah, as they talk about, how the world gets increasingly, and it's a very complex place, especially culturally. I also think it can be boiled down to a simple place, and this ties exactly to your point about empathy. So when I was at Bose, we were partnered with a group in Japan, and too often, the group that we had here in Massachusetts was basically saying, "Oh, well, how come they can't do this way? How come they can't? They're a problem, And I actually speak Japanese, lived in Japan a long time, and I knew kind of what they were going through. And the way we overcame it was we did like 3-week shifts where I took part of the team, and they lived in Japan for 3 weeks, and suddenly they realized that yes, their culture is very different, and the way they work, they're different, and all the different things exist. But at the end of the day, they're humans.
That's right.
They're people.
That's
And
right.
they have the same concerns, about their family. And they have this going on. And are they worried about their work, et cetera? And then we did the same thing. We brought a Japanese group over to our place, et cetera. And suddenly, when something didn't happen quite on the time that they were expecting, they're like, oh, well, Tanaka-san, I'm sure I know he would do this if he could, but I understand. So that empathy just comes out when you start, I see the same type of thing in national conflict, right? When people sit there and go, oh, well, those guys are this. And I'm like, wouldn't it be great if everybody had the opportunity to just live a little while in everybody else's shoes? I
That's
think
right.
it would just fix a lot of
I mean,
things.
goodness gracious, you said it so eloquently. It really is just like, I get it. You go, oh man, I get it. I may
Yeah.
not agree, but I get
But
it.
I understand.
I understand. That's all empathy is. Understanding, self-aware perspective taking. And, we often say, you even said it too, which I love, like, walk a mile in my shoes. And that's great. Like, if I could feel your pain, then I'm likely to empathize with you. But I always tell my daughters, take a step further. It's not just enough to walk a mile in someone's shoes, you have to see the world through their lenses. I think of it this way, like my mother, who's also an academic, when I was working on my dissertation, she called, just check in, how's it going? I was like, oh, Mom, I'm struggling right now. Good grief. I've been in and out of Google Scholar trying to find like the right articles, blah, blah, blah. She was like, Google Scholar? When I was getting my doctorate,
Exactly.
I was using microfiche, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, it's not a
I was ordering a
competition.
book from some library up, across the state.
And I was like, Mom, it's not a competition. And in that moment, we could have bonded because she's felt my pain. She's known my pain because she's done it, but she didn't see it through my lenses. And therefore, I was actually like, all right, Mom, well, let me get back to work here. I actually kind of felt disconnected from her. And I think what your point is just so beautifully stated, that when we can walk a mile in someone's shoes and see their world and understand it, we go, I get this. I get it. And when you talk to them,
It also doesn't mean that you have to say, I'm changing my world to that.
That's
It
right.
just, I understand.
I understand because there are multiple realities. There's courtside seats and nosebleed seats, and both of those experiences are valid. that was the biggest learning for me from writing this book. It was like, it was sort of like time stood still. Once I realized, I go, of course. And to your point, it started to put so many things in my social life into context, be it politics. You go, oh, well, I don't agree with them, but I see how they got there.
Yeah, exactly. I get the path. I see they could get there that way.
I don't agree, but I see it. I got it. And when I do that, when I talk to them, they're not like, them people crazy, them people X, Y, and Z. You treat them with more humanity. And I think that if we do that, and this may be sort of kumbaya, and it may be sort of naivete.
Yeah, a little Pollyannish, but it can work.
I believe
I've seen it work.
I believe that. I think that if we arrive there, I think that we'd just be much more civil. And from a workplace perspective, we're much more cooperative. Right? We go, man, John's having a tough day, man. Like,
Yeah, I
give him a break.
In the book, in my book anyway, I talk about allowing people to be their whole selves.
Yes, right.
Instead of people saying, oh, well, I'm in the work environment, so I have to check these aspects of myself at the door. And so you're not getting the creativity, the innovation, everything that they have to offer, because they've left their hat and their coat and their shoes over here, and all they're in is their slacks and their shirt, and that's all they bring to the office. And you want to bring the whole person, the whole capabilities, because that's going to just make things better for you.
That's right.
As we wind up here, I want to end where we started a little bit. You talked a little bit about continually learning and educating. So what strategies do you recommend for building a culture of continuous learning and development?
I say two things. The first is that there has to be a sort of discourse about the things that you're learning and that you're reading. Elf, this is a cosmetic brand. They do so much more, but they're cosmetics.
You're not talking about the Will Ferrell movie?
No. Elf Cosmetics, their CEO writes a newsletter every week to their company. It's an email. And it's like all things he's learned, all things he's reading, all things he's gleaned over the last 7 days. That modeling of behavior.
That's interesting.
The modeling of behavior becomes such that, like, hey, you read the thing that Terrain read? It's like, oh, I read that too. Oh, interesting. Let's talk about it. The discourse creates norms, right? Creates legitimation, which creates norms. That's a great thing. And then I think the other part to that is about hiring people who are curious.
Yeah.
Like, look, I'm a professor. It's like my second career, if you will. I'm a practitioner first, and found myself in the world of academia. And while I like to think of myself as a pretty decent professor, a pretty decent educator, the one thing I cannot teach is curiosity. I don't know how to teach people to be curious. You have to find people whose disposition is to be curious, to want to know, to want to explore, and you curate the environment that helps them do that very thing.
Yeah. I talk about a similar example, and a mentor of mine shared what he called the Marriott example. He was visiting the Marriott hotels, and he said, man, all these people are happy. Everybody I run into, they're very friendly and happy, et cetera. How do you train them to do this? And they looked at him like he was crazy. He was like, we don't train this. We just hire people who are happy.
Fancy that.
And yeah, so if you want innovation and curiosity, you better be bringing it in.
That's right.
That's great. It's fantastic. We've had Dr. Marcus Collins with us here for this latest edition of Fire Your Hiring Habits podcast. Marcus, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate your insights, and I'm sure our listeners will as well.
Oh, this was a blast. Time went by too fast.
It did. Thanks.
Thank you.
This has been Fire Your Hiring Habits. If you want to empower your organization to reach new heights, go to johnwmitchell.com to find the techniques and tools you need to attract and retain the best team and boldly reimagine your workplace. Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell is a production of Forbes Books.